Welcome to Days of Roar, our Detroit Tigers podcast, brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I am here with Free Press beat writer, Michigan Wolverines partier, Evan Petzold. Ev, how you doing today? You've had an eventful week. We've all had an eventful week. What's up, man?
Yeah, it's been a busy week, first and foremost. I mean, kind of got thrown into the fire with some University of Michigan football coverage, which was a lot of fun because obviously that's a team that I watch. I'd mentioned this several times on the podcast before, but my wife, Savannah, went to the U of M and she got her master's degree there. So she's a really big fan. I grew up as a Michigan fan before going to Central Michigan for college. So obviously I've followed Michigan, a lot of my life. And then also, especially recently, since Savannah went there and we've been watching all the way through the season. We went to the Michigan-Ohio State game, which was awesome. And then got to go to Ann Arbor to help cover the national championship for the Free Press, and was kind of posted up in Chrysler Center, and there were a ton of students there, and it was a lot of fun. It was cool to talk to some different people and, get some different student reactions as to, kind of just what the moment meant for them, right? You had some people who grew up in the state of Michigan and they were Michigan fans from the day that they were born. You had people that were, from California and their dad, went to Michigan. So then they became Michigan fans, and that's how, they ended up falling in love with Michigan, and then they went to school there as well. And then there's some fans that I talked to that said, hey, look, I didn't even really care about Michigan football. And then I came here and they completely changed my mind. And I got to understand like Michigan football is part of the culture here in Ann Arbor and at this university. And, they're playing so well, there was no way I couldn't be a fan. And so now I'm super attached and super locked in. So it was so much fun getting all those different perspectives. And then after the fact, the Free Press kind of said, hey, look, just drive around, see what's up. Obviously we were documenting the celebration of the fans and the students around town. And so I ended up kind of just like chasing fire trucks and was going and, seeing who was lighting couches on fire. So that was a lot of fun too. And I don't know, it was a blast to be a part of that coverage and to help out with it. Don't want to take too much credit though, because there were so many people that were involved on a much, much, much deeper level than I was. I thought Tony Garcia, who covers Michigan football and basketball for the Free Press, I thought he did a phenomenal job all season long. Go check out his stuff. All the columnists did a great job as well. It was a lot of stuff coming from the Free Press, not only just for the national championship, but for the entire season. So that was a lot of fun. And that was just like one piece of my week. I got to go skiing this weekend and then also got to watch the Lions win their first playoff game since 1991. That was awesome to watch. I watched that from the comfort of my own home. Like action-packed week. Not a lot of Tigers stuff though, but a lot of sports.
When you bring up Tony's name, I hadn't really thought about it, but I think about in the summertime, we had a staff meeting down at the Freep. And when we were just everybody who does pods at the Freep, and it's kind of funny thinking about it now because we sat with Tony that day and he was kind of laying out what his plan was for doing his, U of M pod and what his plan was for covering the team. And now you look back on it, 15-0, 2 playoff wins, a national title, amidst all kinds of other things that aren't really that relevant at this point. But who would have thunk it, huh?
No, for real. There were so many storylines for him, and I thought he crushed it. Not only coverage in the Free Press, but also on the podcast too. I'm a regular listener. Him and Reiner Saban do such a phenomenal job. They had some great guests come on the podcast throughout the season. And you're right. Like there were so many different things that happened in Michigan football. Look, man, you had Jim Harbaugh getting suspended twice, and missing games. And now you don't know if he's going to go to the NFL or if he's going to stay. And JJ McCarthy is now going to the NFL. Just so many different storylines around that team. And yeah, the Free Press crushed it per usual, though. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Once in a lifetime, man. And, as far as what happened last night, I don't know if it's once in a lifetime, but it might be. So pretty amazing, pretty damn cool. And shout out to everybody involved with the Lions.
Hey, I hope it's not once in a lifetime, though, because I got a lot of life to live, and I would like to see a few more of those as someone who grew up in the Detroit area. And, while we're giving Tony Garcia a shout out, we might as well give a shout out to Dave Burkett, too, right? He's a 3-time Michigan Sports Writer of the Year. He's been covering the Lions for the Free Press since 2010, and even before then for different publications. But yeah, Dave's as good as it gets in the beat writer business. If you want to know how to be a beat writer, just go read Dave Burkett. He's someone that I look up to, and it's so much fun, like watching the game and then getting to go back either later that night or the next day and read kind of what Dave had to say, both whether it's like grades or whether it's injury reports or whether it's just, hey, look, like his story that I thought was great was it was headlined, with Detroit Lions season on the line, Dan Campbell trusted Jared Goff to deliver, and he did. I thought Dave crushed that story too. So, I mean, Dave does a great job, and the Free Press as a whole has been phenomenal. There's been so much football coverage and football news, both Michigan and Lions, and it's the place to be, man. It really is.
Let's talk about that play just for 1 second for sports fans to understand. I heard Dan Campbell discuss that. I heard Amon-Ra St. Brown discuss that play with Goff, and they both basically said, look, we've gone to that play many, many times late in games to try to get big first downs or make big plays when we really, really needed it. But we've practiced it thousands of times in practice. It's a pure pitch and catch play. And we knew they couldn't stop us from executing it. And that's what they did. I actually turned to my wife last night and said, there's no doubt in my mind they are going to pass for a first down here and end this game, because it's the only way Dan Campbell knows how to play. Period. End of story. He was taking the win. He wasn't doing anything less. It's the only way he knows how to tactically play a football game.
And Mark, I love going to the bread and butter there too, though, right? Like you mentioned, that's a play that they practice over and over and over again. And in big moments when you need a big play, sometimes it's best to just go what works and what you're most comfortable with, right? Like in any profession, no matter what you're doing, right? Like if you're going through a slump and you need to figure it out, you go back to your bread and butter. If you need to deliver in a big moment, you just go to your bread and butter, whatever it is, right? Like what's in your wheelhouse, what you can do. There's no reason to go away from that, especially in a big moment when you need to connect and you need to execute. They did a great job of that.
If you've ever played football with pads on and a helmet on, you understand that there are times when they can't stop you. And that play, that go-to play at that time,
yep,
I promise you that's exactly how they felt about it. How about Evan Petzold wasn't born until 1998, so that was his first experience with playoff NFL football. So I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, at least in a positive light. I mean, there's been a few that I've been let down on that end, but to see the Lions win a playoff game, that was really cool. To get to be texting back and forth and on FaceTime with my dad, throughout the game, that was cool too, because he's somebody that's watched the Lions for a long time and he raised me as a Lions fan, right? And
there you go.
To get to kind of have that banter back and forth was cool with him, and we obviously enjoyed it together. But
let me take that back. You did get a chance to see the Dallas playoff game.
That's what I'm saying, but that was on the wrong side of it, man. That wasn't the same as that experience yesterday. And watching from the seat of my home with my wife was awesome. I wouldn't have it any other way. But away from the football talk, Mark, pitchers and catchers do report in about 30 days. So baseball is around the corner.
I just want to, the Detroit Tigers are very big on the culture they feel like they are beginning to create. And I just want to read this quote from Brad Holmes, somebody that in 3 years transformed the team. And in hiring Dan Campbell, in collaborating with him on the type of players they want, has created a culture. And here's the quote. Brad Holmes said, "We went through darkness and it shaped us, all right. It shaped us for this moment. And if you don't think the Detroit Lions have a culture, then you're not paying attention."
And if you don't think the Tigers are well on their way, you're not paying attention either.
Well, my answer is I think they have intentions. I think they need to perform. And once you perform, then you can take credit for having created a culture. So until that happens, it's just plans. When you do it, then it's something you can talk about. So 30 days until pitchers and catchers report. It just seems like yesterday that the season ended. A lot of things have gone on. It's time for the big two. Okay. Question one of the big two. This one you guys can blame on me, but I was kind of thinking about the Detroit Tigers the other day, and I said to myself, are the Tigers fun yet? And when I say fun yet, the Lions are fun. The Michigan Wolverines, for those who are fans, are fun. Okay. Are the Tigers fun yet? Or are there too many guys still that are in the class of, well, they're talented, they might be good, but they still need to take that next step and to graduate to being really good, actually good, all-star good, 3 war and above good. So, yes, they have talent, but are they really good? And in order to be fun, you have to have some guys be good. So I ask you, Evan Petzold, who spends 230 days a year all around Tiger baseball players, if not longer, and hopefully this year you'll get an extra 2 to 4 weeks of it. Are the Tigers fun yet?
The Tigers are fun because they're interesting, but the Tigers are not good. The Tigers are not good, point blank. Okay? The Tigers did not have, correct, but the Tigers are not a good baseball team yet. And they have work to do before they can call themselves a good baseball team. Remember, this was a team that had a losing record last season. And they've had losing record on losing record on losing record on losing record for years and years and years and years. So no, they are not a good baseball team yet. But they're fun because they're interesting. They're fun because you say, Riley Green, healthy for a full season, that could be a lot of fun. Jake Rogers, it's pretty fun. Gary Carpenter, yeah, that's a fun baseball player. Spencer Torkelson, can he hit for a little bit more batting average? Like, can we get that batting average up a little bit more? But that 30 home runs, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it? It was a lot of fun. You think about guys like Tarek Skubal coming back from the flexor tendon and just dominating the way that he dominated. That was a lot of fun. Reese Olson out of nowhere, nasty. That was a lot of fun. Jason Foley, had a lot of fun watching him pitch. Alex Lang, when he's inside the strike zone, is a ton of fun. So there's a lot of guys that are fun. And they're enjoyable players to watch. Javi Baez, when Javi Baez is at his best, he is arguably the most fun baseball player in the league when he's on his game, offensively and defensively. Go back and look what he did with the Chicago Cubs. Look at what he did with the New York Mets. It's a fun baseball player. Parker Meadows, defensively, so much fun. Watch him run the bases. That's a blast. That's so cool. Like there's nothing I'd rather do than watch Parker Meadows play defense and run the bases. Sometimes I feel like that's just how unique it is. It's different. You don't see that out of a player all the time. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of guys that fit that mold. I think at times we've seen Matt Manning. He's looked really, really fun. The question is, can it all come together? And that's the biggest question mark, because sure, it's fun because they're interesting, but like I said, I mean, is what Jake Rogers did, is that sustainable? Can Riley Green stay healthy for a full season? You know, is Kerry Carpenter going to keep this thing going? We have every reason to believe he will, but, you know, he kind of struggled down the stretch at the end of the season last year. Spencer Torkelson, can he increase his batting average? Tarek Skubal, can he stay healthy? I think he can. Colt Keith, what's he going to do when he comes up and makes his debut? He's a fun prospect, but is he good yet? No. So a lot of these guys aren't good yet, but they're a lot of fun. And that's where I'm at with this team as a whole. I think that they are a collection of fun players because they're interesting, but I don't think any of these players are really like solidified as good, legit, all-star type players. They have to take that next step. That is a must.
So I've said this a few times over the course of last year on the pod. I've been shaped by some really smart baseball people, and it kind of fits into this particular type of sentence. I don't really get too excited about things that people can do sometimes as players. And what you're discussing most of the time about these players is what they're doing some of the time. I'm much more concerned. Don't tell me about what you can do sometimes. I need to know what you can do all the time. Okay. So really good players, 3.5, 4, 5 WAR players, whether it's just during that season or whether it's something they've done over long periods of time. They do it all the time. Miguel Cabrera, before he lost some of his skills to health issues, it was all the time. Okay. Victor Martinez, all the time. JD Martinez, all the time. Justin Verlander, all the time. Max Scherzer, all the time. Okay. So that's the difference between a real player, a real team, and guys that have skills. The Tigers have a lot of players with skills right now. What they need is guys that do it all the time, and then it'll be fun. And that's kind of why I brought it up, because for a change, the Tigers don't lack in talented players. What they do lack in is players that can do it or have demonstrated so far the capacity to do it all the time. That's what I want to see this year. All of these guys are not going to demonstrate they can do it all of the time, but you do need 2 or 3 or 4 of them, likely 4 of them, to show that they can make that transition from talented to actually reliably very good. So that was the entire point of the question. You got any thoughts on that? Do you want to move on to number 2 of the big 2?
No, I mean, I think it's a good point, and I think it's a really good question, and something that I think Tigers fans, if you're out there listening right now, I think you really need to sit and think about that question too. Like, are the Tigers fun yet? And are the Tigers good? Are they really good? What's it going to take to get there? Because that is the reality of their situation, is you do have guys who are not performing up to the standards that they probably can perform long term. You have a guy, I think Spencer Torkelson is like such a great example of all of this, right? I think what he was able to do, from the middle of the season to the end of the season was a lot different than what he did at the beginning of the season. And I know the exit velocities were great. I know he was hitting the ball hard, and he was putting it in play a little bit. I get that. But at the same time, like, he started to hit the ball for power and hit the ball out of the ballpark in the second half of the season, and he was much better. Now the question is, can he do that all the time? Can he do that for a full season? Now, obviously, the trend is, leading me to believe that he's going to be able to do that, because he was able to do it for the back half of the season. It's not like he did it for the first half of the season and then completely lost it and was terrible down the stretch. Torkelson was really good the second half of the season, comparatively speaking. So that's a perfect example of a guy who needs to take that next step and put it together. And if he can be that all the time type of player, you're getting a guy who's going to hit you 40 home runs. Like, that's just the truth. If he's able to do what he did in the second half of the season all the time, and he goes from a sometimes player to an all the time player, Torkelson is a 40 homer guy. No question about it. And that's a huge jump from where he's at right now. And that's a big difference for the Tigers. So no, man, I think it's a perfect question. I think it's a great way to start the big 2, and, really a great way to kick off the podcast, because it's an important question. It's an important conversation, and it's something that we're going to have to continue to evaluate, not only as the offseason continues, but as we get into spring training and as we get through the start of the season. I mean, those first couple of weeks are going to be very, very telling with where this organization and where this team is at.
Just got to try to keep it realistic and try to identify what the expectations are. All right, let's go to a break. We'll come back. We'll get question 2 of the big 2. Got some fun stuff to still discuss, and we'll see you in 60. Question 2, the big 2. There was an elephant in the room, unexpected this week. Could be much ado about nothing for any other team. It wasn't insane. It would be much ado about nothing. But Evan Petzold, man on the inside, explain to me and to Days of Roar listeners in Tigerland, Casey Mize and the $25,000 disagreement with the Tigers, and then we'll get into the rest of the arbitration cases.
Yeah, so this is kind of difficult to explain, because arbitration in and of itself is a very difficult and I don't know, it's a complex thing, right? The way that it goes about. But long story short, the Tigers and Casey Mize, they could not agree on a 1-year contract for the 2024 season before Thursday's deadline to exchange salary figures as part of the arbitration process. Basically, players essentially with 1 to 3 years of service time, they're on the MLB minimum. And then after you reach 3 years of service time, you're eligible for arbitration, and you're able to, kind of negotiate your salary in years, 4, 5, and 6, and then you're a free agent after 6 years. So for Casey Mize, he has reached, 3 years of service time. So now he's able to, argue for his salary in a way. But essentially, the Tigers and Casey Mize couldn't agree. So now the two parties will head to an arbitration hearing after exchanging salary figures on Thursday night. A panel of arbiters will review the case. That'll happen sometime between the end of January and the middle of February. And they're going to select one of two figures. So Mize filed at $840K and the Tigers filed at $815K. So that's a $25K difference. And it's one or the other. The arbiters are going to get to pick either they're taking the salary that Mize filed at or the salary that the Tigers filed at. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know how Casey Mize feels about this because I haven't talked to Casey Mize. I'm going to be very interested in talking to him on the first day of spring training when I get a chance to see him. I've talked to people around his camp and haven't really gotten a good read on, what his feel about all this is like. I know the Tigers feel like there's no bad blood whatsoever, but I'm not going to act like there's no bad blood if I haven't talked to Casey Mize. I don't think that's fair to Casey Mize. So I'd like to talk to him first and foremost before I really have an opinion on what this means for the relationship, because obviously when, teams go to arbitration with the player, sometimes that isn't always great. Now, it's more normalized now than it used to be. And it's more of just like hey, look, we have all the information, we have all the data, and then basically the panel of arbiters just decide, and it's a little bit more cut and dry. But, sometimes players can come out of that feeling pretty hurt because, the team is obviously fighting for the salary that they filed for, right? It's a court case. That's essentially what it is. And so sometimes the player can come out of that feeling pretty beat up by the team that they played for because they go in there and they basically just kind of get attacked, right? So maybe that could happen. Maybe it won't. Maybe there's going to be bad blood. Maybe there's not. Right now, I have no reason to believe that there will be. But again, I haven't talked to Casey Mize yet. So yeah, I mean, that's essentially the case, right? Like Mize is fighting for an $840K salary and the Tigers are fighting to pay him only $815K. And that's a $25K difference. I'm not going to speculate as to why, they couldn't agree on that, but Casey Mize hasn't pitched since April 14th, 2022. He spent the past, 19 plus months recovering from surgeries on his elbow and back. He's expected to be healthy for spring training in mid-February, but at the same time, he hasn't done anything. So the Tigers don't want to pay him a lot of money. I get it. He's not really asking for a whole lot either. It kind of seems pointless to me, but also I don't know if I'm qualified enough to really state that.
All right, let's bring up a few pieces of clarity for everybody to understand. First of all, just because they're $25,000 apart now does not mean that when they were negotiating with each other, that these were the two numbers that they were asking for. So in other words, when Mize's agent was negotiating with the Tigers, he might not have been saying, "Hey, look, I only want $840,000." Okay, he might have been at $900. He might have been at $950, and they
Correct.
might have been haggling. Okay, and when the time comes, they have to submit offers. You're not bound to submit a number that you had previously been discussing with the team. You submit a number that you think you can win at. Okay. To be honest with you, it's kind of weirdly savvy that Mize's agent submitted a lower number, a number that's so close to what the Tigers likely were offering, because if you use MLB trade rumors, our numbers, there's a lot of sites that, estimate what Mize's worth was based
1.2 million.
Correct. So you're already now $200,000 to $250,000 below what the expected number was to begin with. And at the same time, if you don't think there was a little one-upmanship in making the Tigers look bad, then you don't understand how business works. So do I think the Tigers will hold it against Mize if things were to go totally south for Casey Mize from a health standpoint or a performance, standpoint? Yeah, don't be naive. Of course they will. But at the same time, just another move by an Chris Ilitch operated team, kind of like the trade deadline last year, where you just shake your head and go, not too forward thinking, not too savvy, not too business savvy, not too shrewd about how to create leverage.
But Mark, let's not forget here, Casey Mize has 3 minor league options remaining, and he hasn't pitched for the Tigers since 2022.
Yeah, so what, dude?
But you could play that game. But you could play that game on both sides. You could.
Hey, look, here's the deal.
Play that game on both sides.
Here's the deal. They knew his health sucked when they drafted him. They knew his health sucked when he was actually pretty good in 2021. Okay. And, they already gave him $5 million. So this is more than about money. So I don't want to hear the bad mouthing of Casey Mize, blah, blah, blah. The answer is, look, you're counting on Casey Mize to be a dude for you. So let's not start talking about Casey Mize. Poor Casey Mize. He might not be good. He has 3 options. We're going to send him to Toledo. Guess what? If that happens, Evan Petzold, that's a disaster. That's a disaster. That's 4 years into Casey Mize, and you're sending him back to Toledo. Give me a freaking break, okay?
But that's no. But I mean, okay, sure.
3.
Hang on, but sure, maybe that's the case under the former regime. But there's a new guy in town. Let's not forget that, okay?
No, there's not. There's not a new guy in town. There's a haircut that sits up in an office in a quarter zip. There's no new regime. There's a regime called Chris Fetter, Juan Nieves, Robin Lund, and AJ Hinch. And guess who Casey Mize threw for the last time he was healthy? Those 3 guys, and now they've added Robin Lund. Those
guys didn't draft Casey Mize.
Yeah, I got news for you. If Scott Harris is telling people to, option Casey Mize to Toledo, we have a huge, huge issue, bigger than I even anticipate at times. So I don't even want to entertain this nonsense discussion.
That doesn't even make sense to me. No, what you're saying doesn't make sense to me at all.
It doesn't. Explain it to me then.
My point is that Casey Mize was not drafted by anybody who's really currently in the organization.
So what?
You want to count Sam Menz and Jay Sartori maybe, but AJ Hinch, Chris Fetter, Robin Lund, Scott Harris were not in the organization when Casey Mize was drafted. There's no loyalties. So if they send him down, maybe it's just because Casey Mize isn't very good. And isn't that just okay? I mean, it is what it is. Maybe the guy just isn't very good.
Evan, this is just a nonsense discussion. Casey Mize isn't very good. Casey Mize, when he was moderately healthy, was pretty damn good and on the verge of being very good. And then he got hurt. And the idea that a guy that you have this much invested in and are counting on to be good and has tons of, ceiling as a prospect, and we're discussing the downside that he's going to be so bad that we're considering in year 4 to send him to Toledo. Please, I'm getting a headache from this discussion.
Coming back from two major surgeries?
One major surgery and a back surgery. The answer is
the back was plaguing him for a very, very long time. We haven't seen him healthy yet. We haven't seen him throw a pitch since 2022. So I'm just saying, look, I understand where you're coming from with, hey, look, the ARB thing is the ARB thing and it is what it is. But at the same time, like, I don't know if there's any loyalties to Casey Mize here. And if things don't go well, I don't think he's going to get some special treatment because he's former 1-1. Like, I don't think that's the case anymore. That's not how it works. He has to go out there and pitch well. He has to perform. If he wants to get paid more money, he's got to perform. If he wants to stay in the big leagues, he's got to perform. If he wants to make the opening day roster, he's got to perform. Those are all things that aren't like handed to him. He's not just Casey Mize 1-1 anymore. He's just Casey Mize. He's Casey Mize coming back from Tommy John surgery and from back surgery. In a similar way, Spencer Turnbull was just Spencer Turnbull coming back from Tommy John surgery, not Spencer Turnbull, former 2nd-round pick. That attachment doesn't stick with you for that long, especially when you go through things like this. So my only point is he's got to perform if he wants to get paid. He's got to perform if he wants to play in the big leagues. Those are all things that we have to see from him coming back from surgery. I don't know how this really got sidetracked from the ARB stuff, but the point is when it comes to Casey Mize, he's got to play well if he wants to get paid and if he wants to perform well. And there's no loyalties here anymore, I don't think. I don't think there's any loyalties.
All right. So let me ask you this question while we're having this goofy argument in January. If that's the case, then who has more leash, Jack Flaherty or Casey Mize?
It's a good question, I think.
They're not sending Jack Flaherty to Toledo.
They're not paying Casey Mize $14 million either.
Yeah. Well, I just want to ask the question. We'll let that one marinate because
indeed we will. Indeed we will. But let me let people know about the other ARB deals, because the Tigers did actually agree to terms with 3 of the 4 arbitration eligible players. Obviously, like we've talked about, they did not agree to terms with Casey Mize, not yet. That's going to go to an ARB hearing, but they did agree to terms with outfielder Akil Baddoo, catcher Jake Rogers, and left-hander Tarek Skubal. All 3 of those players obviously got raises as first-year ARB players. Akil Baddoo, Super 2 status, so he's going to be able to get 4 ARB years before he's a free agent, whereas Jake Rogers, Tarek Skubal, Casey Mize, they all get 3 years of ARB before they become free agents. Skubal settled with the Tigers at $2.65 million. Rogers settled at $1.7 million. And Akil Baddoo settled at $1.55 million. Once the Tigers trade Baddoo, he's going to be a very expensive Toledo backup, it sure seems, because there's so many outfielders and so many left-handed hitters. But at the same time, not a bad backup to have in Toledo. Probably worth the $1.55 million because there's an injury. At least he can come up and he can draw you some walks. He can hit you some homers. He can steal you some bases, and might not hit a ton, but at the same time, he does enough well that there's still enough value to have, from a depth standpoint. Jake Rogers getting the $1.7 million. He hit 20 homers. Dude deserves to get paid. Good for Jake. Obviously, Tarek Skubal deserving at the $2.65 million, no doubt. I'll be very interested to see if he puts up a great season, how much he's going to make the year after that, because all this stuff compounds too. And that's why the Casey Mize thing is somewhat important with the 815 and the 840 and the 25K difference, because it does compound. How much you make in your first year of ARB is going to determine how much you make in the next year of ARB, because you're not going to end up losing money off of that. You always are going to get a raise. See, Austin Meadows is a perfect example of that. When he went through the ARB system, even though he hadn't played, he still, got a slight raise. So it'll be interesting to see how much those guys make moving forward. But all 3 of those dudes get raises, and we'll see what happens to Casey Mize here down the road.
Well, no shocks. I think Akil Baddoo, when you consider him, depth at Toledo, he's pretty damn good. So, all right. So you wrote an article a little bit about everybody's favorite guy, Riley Green. You got a health update. He's starting to do a few things. Tell us what you found out.
Yeah, so really good news on Riley Green. All signs are pointed in the right direction. It was Monday, January 8th, when he first reported to Lakeland to start his hitting program and get his hitting progression underway. So he started the offseason rehabbing at De La Cruz Sports Performance in Orlando, which isn't far from his hometown. He's still doing some work there, but now he's going to Lakeland. It sounds like a few times a week to go and, work on his hitting. And seems like, all signs are pointing in the right direction. He's going to be ready to go for opening day. He'll be ready to go for spring training games in late February. That's the expectation. Obviously, this is a guy who's coming back from Tommy John surgery. And, some people have talked to me and said, hey, look, realize Bryce Harper came back from Tommy John surgery. Now, this is the Philly star, Bryce Harper, in 160 days, just over 5 months. But he spent most of last season as the designated hitter, also played some first base, didn't play the outfield at all. Now, the main difference in the 2 cases, Harper underwent Tommy John surgery on his throwing elbow, whereas Green underwent Tommy John surgery on his non-throwing elbow. So Harper's able to make it back in just over 5 months with Tommy John surgery on his throwing elbow. Seems like Green's going to be able to be back into action, playing games, for spring training games when they start at the end of February. That's going to be about 4 months for him post-surgery. So he's in great shape. It sounds like he's going to play. Obviously, there's going to be some easing in process, right? Like, you're not going to throw the guy into the outfield from day one, have him play all 9 innings or anything like that. They're going to take it slow with him. But yeah, all systems go for Riley Green. He's been hitting in Tiger Town and should be good to go when spring training games begin.
Exciting news. I don't think it's anything less than we expected. I imagine most of his defensive work in spring training will be done on the backfields and in practices before games. I wouldn't expect to see him in the outfield until maybe 10 to 14 days before the season starts for 2 or 3 innings. And I don't expect him to see left field on a consistent basis, even in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, maybe 3-4 times a week. Probably going to get a lot of DH at bats in April, but it's good news that he's healing. Got to build up the strength. Going to be taking a lot of swings. I don't think the public understands how many swings hitters take a day, whether it's the off season or just prepping for the season or in spring training. It's hundreds and hundreds of swings, and it's a lot of wear and tear on your elbow. So you got to kind of build up to it. And I'm sure that's exactly what the process that he's building up with now. So,
and to your point though, like the Tigers are going to have the DH spot open, which is huge. And yeah, I mean, he's just playing light catch right now, performing light defensive drills 3 to 4 times per week. So he's not doing a ton of defensive stuff at this point yet, but he is swinging. He is healing. He is recovering, and he's going to be good to go. My biggest question now is going to be, what does the healthy Riley Green look like? If you can get him healthy for a full season, how much of a difference maker does that make? And I think we're planning to have a little bit of a 40 WAR discussion, so maybe we can get into that later. But just like generally speaking, healthy Riley Green, if he can be on the field for the full season, even if he has to DH, quite a bit at the beginning, even if he has to DH, a handful of times even after the first few weeks of the season, if that's something that has to become maybe part of his normal schedule for a little bit, like that's okay. But getting this guy's bat in the lineup day in and day out is going to be a game changer for this team, I think.
Well, what I brought up before, and I think I want to repeat again is, and this, is that, guys take, whether it's soft toss or facing machines, they're getting a few hundred swings in a day. At this point in time in January, they're facing pretty high-end velocity against machines and doing all kinds of measurements of, exit velocity and doing all different things in their off season. I'm not even sure Riley's at a point in time where he can take full swings against a machine. So he's definitely behind what a normal off season looks like.
Correct.
And I'm sure that's going to ramp up in the next 3 weeks to where he can actually take swings. But, it's a skill and you need to hone it. And, facing velocity, making sure you're making contact out front, getting the rhythm of your swing, that comes through repetition. And that's hundreds upon thousands of swings over the course of days, weeks, and then months. And he's not been able to do any of that this winter. And he's going to start doing it soon. And I'm sure it'll come back to him, but it's something we should keep an eye on and keep some perspective about, because it's not a normal off season for Riley Green honing his swing. So,
which could mean a slow start to the season, and that might be the case, and that's going to be okay if he's able to put together some of those months like he had, back last season in May when he hit 365 with 3 homers and over 1,000 OPS in 25 games, right? Like his batting average was third in the big leagues behind Freddie Freeman and Leody Taveras. So this is a guy, if he can put up enough of those, May-like months, even if they're later in the season, it's going to be a huge boost to the Tigers. Even if he starts slow, obviously you're going to have to give him a ton of leeway. Like there's, no one's going to be coming down on Riley Green if he's struggling to start the year. But eventually, once he turns that corner, once he gets going, I'm expecting big things.
And I think I want to remind people, Riley Green is the baseball equivalent of a gym rat. His dad owns a hitting facility. I mean, all Riley Green's been doing since he's probably 8 years old in the wintertime in Florida is going into a facility and taking 1 billion swings. So this is one of the first times he's not been able to do that. I'd be curious how he felt about it. I'd be curious to what his answer is about it, because I'm sure he's probably going stir crazy not being able to do it. I mean, you can only go out on your boat fishing so many times, man. So
he loves his fishing.
I know. Maybe we'll get a check-in from Evan Petzel the next time you make contact to get a an update how he's been able to navigate the frustration of not being able to do what he's been doing every year for the last 15, 16 years, because he's had an unusual caliber of access that most people didn't have before. So, all right. Well, this week was the international signing period. It's something the Tigers like to talk about for one day a year, based upon their past history of two players actually being good since I think I was in high school in the 70s. They've had Willie Adames, Gregory Soto, and maybe you can remind me of one or two other players. Avisail Garcia, that would be the third one. I'd be hard-pressed to come up with the fourth one, but that's pretty much the IFA, bounty they've been able to generate since, say, 2010. It runs from January 15th through December 15th. It's a 335-day window. Talk about how much money they had to spend, which was a pretty decent amount, who they signed, and let's talk about those 16 and 17-year-old international free agent signings the Tigers have had.
Hey, let's not forget about Eugenio Suarez either. I think he probably deserved to be in that grouping as well.
It's an outstanding call there, brother. So
but aside from that, I got nothing else. So that's all I'm going to say is aside from that, I have nothing else. But no, look, yeah, the Tigers, obviously, they got to improve in that area, Mark. I mean, they do. And we're going to see hopefully some improvements in the future. But a lot of these guys, you have to remember, they have deals like very, very, very early. Like from the time that they just become teenagers, they have these deals set in place. So we won't get a track record for the Scott Harris regime in the international market for a few years because one, these aren't even right now players that Scott Harris was around to give the okay on. That's going to happen, down the road. Right. So we don't even really know who Scott Harris is out there getting on the international market. And we also aren't going to know how they develop and how they work in the Tigers player development system until, several years, many, many years down the road. So Tigers need to be better in this area. It's going to take some time for them to kind of revamp some things. Rob Metzler, the assistant general manager, who Scott Harris brought in, has a really big hand in that. Tom Moore has been around, leading the international scouting department for a long time. Miguel Garcia is another guy in there who's been around for a long time. But bringing in Rob Metzler to anchor things, I think, is pretty big. But yeah, so international signing period, it began on Monday, so it runs from January 15th through December 15th. It's a 335-day window. The Tigers had $6.52 million signing their signing bonus pool for the 2024 class. That was tied for the seventh highest spending limit with the Oakland Athletics, Milwaukee Brewers, Seattle Mariners, Miami Marlins, Tampa Bay Rays, Cincinnati Reds, and Minnesota Twins. So they have $6.52 million to spread across whoever they end up signing for 335 days on the international market. The Tigers got their big ticket player, if you will, in Nestor Miranda, who turns 18 in late February. He ranked number 25 on Baseball America's top 100 list and number 45 on MLB Pipeline's top 50 list. He received a $1.5 million signing bonus. The Tigers also signed Venezuelan outfielder Jesus Pinto, who ranked number 41 on Baseball America's list. He turned 17 at the end of March. He received a $900K signing bonus. So the Tigers essentially, they put $2.4 million or 36.8% of their bonus pool into Miranda and Pinto. Just for sake of, hey, we have no idea how these guys are going to turn out, I'm going to read the Baseball America report on Nestor Miranda, who is the highest bonus that the Tigers are giving out and also the highest ranked player. The Baseball America report reads, quote, Miranda has a hulking, physical, mature build for his age with the strength in his swing that leads to big power displays. His power comes from a short swing, and he taps into that home run power in games at times. Though, like a lot of young sluggers, he tends to get too pull-oriented. Miranda should start his career at third base, where he does have a strong arm, though given how big he is already, there's a good chance he could end up at first base, end quote. So that's Nestor Miranda. He is a 17-year-old who turns 18 in late February with a ton of power, and we'll see how he develops.
Well, when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's hard enough projecting juniors in high school, how good they're going to be the senior year. So to start giving guys that are 17, $2.5 million trying to figure out what they're going to look like and how they're going to play after is, it's more of a lotto ticket than it is a skill. And I guess there are the Ronald Acuna Juniors, who, by the way, did not get a ton of money. But, it is, IFA signs are a really difficult thing to project. And I guess they haven't done too much historically, as we discussed, but, we'll have to find out. All right, we're going to take our last break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Evan's roster prediction 2.0, what the season may look like, and then we're going to get out of here. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, it's getting late in January. Roster starting to, at least from a projection standpoint, take shape. You did an Evan Petzold roster prediction 2.0. You got any additions and subtractions from your original version? And where do you think we stand with that?
Yeah, original version came out a while back. So it was 1.0 and then obviously now 2.0. I added Zach McKinstry, Jack Flaherty, Andrew Chafin, Shelby Miller. I think the Jack Flaherty, Andrew Chafin, and Shelby Miller additions are all quite obvious. But I also added Zach McKinstry. I'll explain that in a second. But with those 5 additions, I subtracted Nick Maton, Reese Olson, Alex Faedo, and Miguel Diaz. Faedo has a 4th-year option, so I think he seems most likely to be in the minor leagues to start the season. He can bounce back and forth. Miguel Diaz, while I did like what he was able to do at the end of the year, I think he could easily be DFA'd and just re-sign with the Tigers and pitch in Toledo until they need him. There probably isn't room for Reese Olson if Casey Mize makes the team, unless the Tigers create more room in the bullpen and keep Olson to piggyback with Mize, which I don't think that's a bad idea. But at the same time, that leaves the bullpen short, and the Tigers don't plan to do a 6-man rotation. So does it really make sense to carry 6 true starters and shove another one in the bullpen? I don't really know if that's the best way to go about it. Time will tell. But for now, I think it's probably still Mize over Olson in that category, unless Mize struggles in spring training. Like I said before, Mize does have those minor league options. Also, I think Maton probably has more long-term upside than McKinstry, at least offensively. But I got to give credit to Zach McKinstry for his defense last season. I don't think he can hit very much, but he was a Gold Glove finalist in the utility category. And I do think to start the season, that's going to be valuable for the Tigers. So those are my additions and subtractions. Again, the Jack Flaherty, Andrew Chafin, Shelby Miller, those are pretty easy additions to make because the Tigers went out and signed those guys to big league deals. And then, Zach McKinstry, swapping him for Nick Maton, that's just tipping the cap to the guy who, played some pretty good defense for the Tigers last year and I think is valuable coming off the bench, even if I have no belief whatsoever in his bat anymore.
Well, here's what I'll say about Wolfie Maton. If he hits 8 homers and 397 in spring training, and it seems like he's going to field the baseball a whole lot better than he did last year, yeah, he could force himself into the mix.
The upside.
Maybe playing third base with his brother, Matt Vierling. But I would say it's going to take something totally unexpected. I don't think Nick Maton did himself any favors with his 2023 season in any way, shape, or form. Not with the front office, not with AJ Hinch. And if you're going to be a utility player, you have to be able to catch the baseball if you're going to be a utility player for AJ Hinch. I think we've learned that in 3 years, if we've learned anything. As far as Reese Olson goes, I think the Casey Mize, Reese Olson, Matt Manning triangle will be pretty interesting. Yeah, I think all of them need to understand they're going to have to pitch well. Nobody's getting anything for free. If you want to talk about somebody that needs to show a little something this spring, I would say Matt Manning is in that mix for sure. So
I agree.
Not that he did not throw extremely well the last 6 or 7 starts when he was healthy, because he did. Yes, he doesn't strike people out, but he gets people out. So, but yeah, I think the Tigers are a little frustrated with the entire career arc of Matt Manning, and I would say this would be a good time for him to show a little something. I think they basically have shown with Spencer Turnbull, everybody has a point in time where it's put up or shut up, and we don't want to hear excuses anymore. And Spencer Turnbull is no longer a part of Detroit Tigers organization. So I think you can, see from that, the way that was handled, the Tigers will at some point in time have had enough of you if you don't produce. So, I want to, what other changes you got on the roster? You got anything else you find interesting? You think they may add a bat? I mean, there seems to be a pretty slow moving free agent market. There are quite a few major league players out there. I'm kind of curious if you think that anything might fall into the category of, we need to take a look at that. It's too good to pass up without looking at.
Not yet, I don't think. I don't think that's really kind of in the game plan as of now. Maybe that becomes the case later on. But what I thought was more interesting, and I kind of did this exercise after you let me know about your first question of the big two, and I hinted at this a little bit ago, but the 40 WAR question, right? How to get to 40 WAR. I thought that was interesting. And so what I did was I took my opening day roster projection, 13 position players, 13 pitchers, and I wrote out, each player's name and then their Fangraphs WAR right next to it. And then I did all the math and I added it up. So basically what I came up with was position player WAR 15.6, pitcher WAR 13.2, and that got me to a total WAR of 28.8. So 28.8 WAR, but that's not including Colt Keith, Justin Henry Malloy, or Casey Mize. And let's also keep in mind that's not including Reese Olson's 1.5 WAR from last season because he's not on my projected roster either. So I ended up looking at what they did last season, putting it all together. And that's, again, let's keep in mind that's, Parker Meadows only doing what he did at the very end of the season because that's when he came up. That's Kerry Carpenter, including the time that he missed with the shoulder injury. That's Tarek Skubal only pitching half the season, right? But that's what it ends up coming out to based on Fangraphs is 28.8 WAR. And I said, okay, so let's get the Tigers to 40 WAR.
All right.
And so how do we do that?
Let me address a question here because you have to remember that I'm old, kind of mean, semi-impatient. So were these WAR numbers from 2023 or your projected 2024 numbers?
From 2023. So the question is, here's what they did in 2023. How do we get that number from 28.8 to 40? And I said, that was the first question I asked myself. I said, okay, so Colt Keith, that's 3 WAR. Justin Henry Malloy, probably 0.5 WAR. Casey Mize, let's throw him 1.5 WAR, which is exactly what Reese Olson accomplished in 103 innings last season. So right there, you have essentially 33.5 WAR. So for the sake of clarity, let's say instead of 28.8, it's 30 WAR. You add those on, those 3 players, and you end up right around 33 WAR. Okay, so how do you get to 40 WAR? Meaning you need 6, 7 more WAR. Well, what if Javier Baez goes from 0.8 to 2 and he adds 1.2 WAR with better offense? Parker Meadows, what if he goes from 1 WAR to 3 WAR? That adds 2 WAR. Defense for a full season, I could see him getting there as long as he hits a little bit. Spencer Torkelson, I could see him making a 1.6 WAR jump from 1.4 to 3. If he puts more balls in play, he's going to have a higher batting average and he's going to hit for more home runs. Kerry Carpenter, I think he could go from 2.2 WAR to 3 WAR, adding 0.8 WAR. He plays the full season. Remember, he missed a good chunk of last year with the shoulder injury. So you add all those up, you're getting a little bit closer to 40 WAR, and that's not even counting Tarek Skubal pitching a full season. So I'm banking on a lot of upside there. I'm not really accounting for regression at this point, but I do think it's possible with the upside plays. I know that's a lot to throw at listeners. Mark, can you kind of help listeners understand and also kind of give some of your thoughts too?
Yeah. So let's try to make this brief and not too much math, or else people will be falling asleep listening to us. But
sorry.
let's give them an answer of exactly what we're kind of discussing. So for 2023, as an example, Riley Green last year, 2.3 WAR. Okay. Fangraphs projects them at least. I'm pretty sure the Steamer projection projects Riley for a 3 WAR. All right. So right there, you're picking up 0.7 of a WAR. I would say if Riley Green plays 143 games like Steamer is projecting, he's probably going to be a 3.5 or 4 WAR. So let's give him an extra 1 WAR as a player. All right. They have Spencer Torkelson, basically 242, 333, 457, a 116 WRC plus, and a 1.7 WAR, which is not too much different, to be really blunt about the idea of what he did in 2023. Do I think Spencer Torkelson he was a 1.4 WAR. Do I think he could be a 2.5 WAR this year? Yeah, I think that's another WAR. So
how about a 3 WAR player though? Because that's a 1.6 difference.
I would say that he's going to need to hit a lot more, and he's going to need to field a lot with a capital ALOT, a lot better.
I agree on the defense. I agree.
All right. Jakey Rogers, 2.2 WAR. We'll take that all day. Next year, probably we'll be happy with that. Kerry Carpenter was a 2.2 WAR. Last year, they have him projected for a lot less than that this year. He's less than a 1 WAR by Steamer. I think that's pretty unfair. Would I take a 2.2 WAR? Yes, I would. I think a huge jump can come from the maligned, the hated, and the ever struggling Javi Baez, who was a 0.9 WAR, if I think I'm not mistaken, last year. Javi Baez was a 0.8 WAR last year. And I think Javi Baez could easily be a 2.5 WAR player this year, maybe a 3 WAR player. All he needs to do is hit 245 with 20 to 25 homers, and he's close to a 3 WAR player. So the biggest, additive WAR could come from Javi Baez. I also think Colt Keith, although Steamer only projects him for 10 homers and 84 games in a 1 WAR, they do project him for a pretty strong WRC plus of 105. That's pretty decent for a rookie.
He's going to play a lot more than 84 games too.
Well, no kidding. So I think that he could easily be a 2 WAR. So now all of a sudden you got a 2.5 to 3 WAR shortstop, a 2 WAR second baseman, and probably a 2 to 2.5 WAR first baseman. You're starting to pick up right there. You picked up almost 5 WAR. So now you're even, up to close to 32, 33 WAR before we've even discussed pitchers. I think third base will be a struggle. I think Parker Meadows in center field could be somewhere between a 2 WAR if he hits 230. If he hits 235 with 15 homers, he could be a 3 WAR player. So, indeed. I mean, just from hitters, you could easily see your way up to, 35 WAR. Mark Canha is going to be probably a decent amount. The DH spot is going to produce much better than Miguel Cabrera did. He didn't hit any homers. He had a huge negative for only being a DH.
But Mark, I think Canha is a steady 1.5 WAR player, and I think that's perfectly fine.
Which is 1 more WAR than Miguel Cabrera was.
Facts. Now, I do think there's going to be some regression, which we can't forget about either. And maybe this is for a later podcast. We can dig into this even more. But could Jake Rogers, regress from his 2.2 WAR?
Yes.
Could he be a 1.5 WAR player? Sure. Andy Ibanez probably isn't going to play as much. Zach McKinstry probably isn't going to play as much. Andy Ibanez was a 1.6 WAR player. I don't know if he plays as much now that Colt Keith is around and Matt Vierling seems likely to, hold down that third base position for a little bit. So Andy Ibanez might not get as many opportunities. Zach McKinstry, same thing, 1.2 WAR. He might not play as much. So there could be some regression there from both of those players just based on opportunity. So look, my point is I think if you look at the upside and you look at what Javier Baez could give you, you look at what Parker Meadows could give you, you look at what Torkelson could give you, Kerry Carpenter, a full healthy season of Riley Green, Tarek Skubal for a full season. I think if you look at the upside of all those players, you can find your way to 40 WAR, but it's not a guarantee. And that's kind of where I'm at with this team right now. And I think that goes back to exactly what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. I'm bringing this thing full circle with, it's a fun team because it's intriguing. There's a lot of upside. But these guys aren't good yet. These guys aren't great yet. They still have a lot to prove. I'm excited to see what happens. Spring training, man, it's right around the corner.
Well, that's the entire point of the discussion. We're going to revisit this a little more, especially in spring training, once we actually get to see what the roster starts shaping up as, and how good Colt Keith can play defense. Is Matt Vierling as locked in at third base as we are? There's a lot of questions in the pitching staff. We'll kind of get to those. All right, it's time for us to get the heck out of here. It's been a hell of a week, to say the least. I mean, a natty, a playoff win, Spartans and the Wolverines won a hoop game. Not to mention the Red Wings and even the lowly, and when I say lowly, I mean lowly, the Detroit Pistons won a basketball game. So we're gonna have a hard time duplicating a week like this again. So for my partner Evan Petzold, I'd like to thank our executive producer Robert Chan, our executive producers Kirk Crawford and Anjanette Delgado. I want to remind you to rate, subscribe, and comment both at Apple, Spotify, and wherever you listen to us. To my grandson, Braden Michael Gorash, Pops says hello. And I want to remind everybody, we'll be back next week after another Lions playoff win. And peace.